Okay, good morning. My name is McKenna James, and this is my interview. I'm interviewing Daniel, and can you tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, interests, and what brought you to where you are today?
Sure. First off, my name is Daniel. I was born in the Bay Area. I grew up in a bicultural household. My mom is Mexican American, and my dad is Filipino. Growing up in such a diverse family has exposed me to two rich cultures and helped me develop a deep appreciation for language, food, and family. I'm currently studying communication and poli-sci, and I'm passionate about storytelling, justice, and community building. I think what really brought me to where I am today is a combination of curiosity and a strong desire to understand people, how we relate, where we come from, and how that influences the way we communicate.
Perfect. First off, our section is going to be cultural identity. And my first question is, how do you identify your cultural background or identity?
Identify as both Mexican American and Filipino American. It's sometimes hard to explain what that feels like because each side of my heritage has its own customs, its own values, and even languages. But together they've shaped me in really meaningful ways throughout my life.
Awesome. Next question is, are there any specific traditions, values, or beliefs that are important in your culture specifically?
Absolutely. On the Mexican side of my family and faith are central. Big gatherings with music, with food, tamales at Christmas or Dia de los Muertos. Altars are really meaningful. In Filipino culture, there's a strong emphasis on respect, especially for elders. We use words like po and mano po to show it. Both cultures value hospitality, humility, and helping others.
Perfect. What do you think people often misunderstand or can maybe overlook about your culture, and how do you see it from there?
I think people sometimes see cultural stereotypes and stop there. For example, people might associate the Mexican culture only with tacos, fiestas, Taco Bell, or Filipino culture with nursing. But there's no such more depth. Our histories, our struggles, our resilience don't always get acknowledged by most folks.
Totally. Do you feel like your cultural identity has changed over time, and can you maybe explain how or why?
Yeah, definitely when I was younger, I felt like to choose one side or the other depending on where I was. I didn't always feel Mexican enough or even Filipino enough, but over time I've learned to embrace being both. I don't need to split or divide myself. I can honor both cultures fully and authentically.
Perfect. We are now going to move into section 2, section 2. And it is communication style and values. And the first question for that section will be, how would you describe the way people in your culture typically communicate with one another?
In both cultures, Mexican and Filipino, there's a lot of warmth and expressiveness. We tend to use nonverbal cues like touch, eye contact, and tone to show care or respect. But there are also moments when we're more direct, especially in the Filipino culture, because we want to avoid confrontation or in causing embarrassment, as an example.
Totally. Can you give an example of how you've maybe communicated in your culture, or how communication in your culture could be different from other cultures you experienced, or like where you've traveled and like how it kind of relates to different cultures and how you've seen?
Sure. I actually had a chance to study abroad in Spain. I noticed how direct people were, especially in an academic or even public settings. Compared to that, my family is much more subtle. especially when it comes to expressing disagreement. My mom or dad may use hints or body language instead of saying something straight, outright, or forthcoming, to kind of tamper things down.
Next question. What role does language kind of play in shaping your sense of self or kind of how you interact with others around you?
I think language helps me connect me back to my roots. As an example, I speak Spanish and I do a little bit of Tagalog and understand a little bit of Tagalog. When I speak Spanish with my abuela, I feel this deep generational bond. But when I struggle with Tagalog, I sometimes feel like I'm missing a piece of myself. It reminds me of how tied identity and language really are.
Totally. Is English your first language? If not, what challenges do you face in mainstream society, maybe communicating or building relationships with people, maybe at your workforce or at home, and maybe kind of specify where it kind of struggles with where?
English is my first language, but I grew up hearing a mix at home. Sometimes I still struggle with code switching, like switching between home language and professional language. There's also this pressure to sound a certain way to be taken seriously, which can feel challenging and occasionally alienating, both at home and in a professional environment.
Totally understand. Next question. Have you ever experienced stigma or kind of felt looked down upon because of the way you speak, or that because you have an accent by your peers, maybe other people in your life? Could you maybe explain?
Definitely, especially when I speak with an accent in Spanish, or make grammar mistakes. People sometimes assume I'm less educated or less authentic, which can be really frustrating. It's as if my fluency is being used to measure my cultural worth, and I'm gonna make mistakes just because I'm not naturally speaking those languages consistently.
Yeah. Okay. Have you ever felt like you had to, quote unquote, code switch or adjust how you express yourself based on your audience?
Definitely, all the time actually, both at school or work. I'll have to use more formal language, avoid slang or pronounce words in a certain way. With family or close friends, I can relax and speak Spanglish or use cultural references freely. It's like living in kind of two different worlds and being able to adjust, change, and it's consistent. It's daily for me to be able to have to do this.
Awesome. We are going to move into section 3, and this one is titled Navigating Your Differences. And my first question to you is, have you ever experienced a situation where cultural differences led to a misunderstanding or miscommunication possibly?
Okay, so one time in a group project in high school, I didn't speak up about a conflict. I thought or felt it would be disrespectful, and then later found out that others interpreted my silence as disengagement, as if I didn't care or wasn't involved. It was definitely a learning moment for me about how different cultures approach assertiveness and conflict.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Okay, continuing. My next question is, how do you personally adapt your communication when maybe interacting with people from different cultures or different backgrounds?
Well, being from the Bay Area, there's a huge culture challenge. And obviously, for me being both Filipino American and Mexican American, and growing up here in the Bay Area, it's definitely shaped how I communicate with people from all different backgrounds. The Bay is so diverse. From a young age, I was surrounded by different cultures, languages, from my first days at school through high school. It's helped me become a lot more aware of how communication isn't just about the words you say, it's also about how you say them, when you say them, and who you're saying them to. When I talk to people from different cultural backgrounds, I try to do two main things. First is, and this is generally, is listen more. And then adjusting my tone and style depending on who I'm speaking with. As an example, in the Filipino culture, being respectful, especially to elders or authority, is super important. You don't interrupt, you wait for your turn. Sometimes you soften your opinions so they don't come out as disrespectful. However, in a classroom setting, especially in the United States or even in college, you're expected to speak up and challenge ideas. So I've had to learn when to switch between those modes, when to be assertive and when to hold back a bit. I've also learned that humor, slang, and body language don't always translate across cultures. Growing up with friends who are Vietnamese, Black, Indian, Chinese, Latino, I've seen how jokes or sarcasm can totally miss the mark depending on the individual and their cultural background. So I try to read the room, observe how people are communicating and match their energy and formality. With international students, I might slow down how I talk to avoid too much slang and try to be extra clear. That's not to talk down to anyone, it's simply out of respect for them and their individual cultures. There was this time in a group project in college where one of my teammates who was from Korea didn't speak up much. I first thought maybe he wasn't that involved, or perhaps there was a language barrier. But I later found out it was because in his culture, group harmony is more important than being the loudest voiced. So I started checking in with him privately, occasionally giving him space to share his ideas. And once I made that adjustment, the group dynamic improved significantly. So yeah, for me, adapting my communication isn't about changing who I am. It's about being more flexible and respectful towards others. It's about realizing that not everyone sees conversation the same way. And if I really want to connect with someone, I have to meet them halfway or somewhere along the way in order for us to have a better understanding of each other.
Yeah, totally. Okay, my next question is, are there values or behaviors in your specific culture that you think might be misunderstood by some people from other cultures?
Certainly. As someone both being Filipino American and Mexican American, there are a lot of things that could be misunderstood if you're not familiar with either culture. As an example, in Filipino, we're super family oriented, and family always comes first. That might mean living with extended family, helping out with money or financially, or putting family responsibilities before personal freedom. To people from more individualistic cultures, that might seem like we're being held back or we're too dependent. But for us, it's not about lacking independence. It's about honoring your roots and taking care of your people. It's a value that's tied to love and loyalty. Also, something that I've noticed is how we express respect. Like we use titles, tita, tito, even for people who aren't related to us by blood. It's a way of showing honor and connection. But to someone who didn't grow up with that, it might feel strange or overly formal. On the Mexican side of my culture, my father's side, I'd say being expressive is a big thing. We use our hands a lot when we talk. We raise our voices when we're excited or passionate, and conversations can get loud. Someone not used to that, that might come off as aggressive or overly emotional, but it's really just warmth and involvement. My family, that's how we show love. We debate, we laugh loud, we talk over each other a little. It's not disrespect, it's simply connection. I think another value that might be understood is the idea of saving face in the Filipino culture. A lot of times we avoid confrontation because we don't want to embarrass someone or cause tension. We use subtle hints instead of being blunt. In American culture, especially in the West, people might prefer you to be direct and just say it. But that's not always seen as respectful in our traditions. So yes, and I think unless you grow up in these cultures, you might misread things. What looks like being too quiet might actually be humility. What sounds like too much emotion might actually be warmth. What looks like being over-attached to family might actually be about honor and loyalty. That's why context matters so much when communicating in cultures.
Yeah. Okay. My next question is, what advice would you give to someone who maybe wants to communicate more respectfully or effectively across all cultures and just in general?
I think the first and probably the biggest piece of advice is don't assume and lead with curiosity. It's something I've learned from both my cultural background and just being in such a diverse area like the Bay Area. People have such different ways of communicating, and if you go into conversation thinking your way is right, you're going to miss out on a lot. Instead of asking questions like, is that common in your culture, in your family, or what's the best way to say that? Just a small act of being interested, I think makes people feel more respected and involved in the conversation. Another big thing is don't be afraid to admit when you don't know something. It's better to ask than to fake it. I've learned so much just by being honest and open. And when someone asks me about my own culture, like why we do mano, the hand gesture of respect to elders, or what fiestas mean in our communities, I actually appreciate it. It shows they care enough to learn or are thinking about how things are in my culture and how they can better interact with me and my family or just the culture in general. Also realizing that body language, eye contact, silence, even the distance that you stand from someone can mean different things in different cultures. In the U.S., people tend to value eye contact and direct communication, but in Filipino culture, too much eye contact can lead to confrontational, especially with someone who's elder. So learning these things can help avoid these miscommunications. And finally, being patient. People might speak differently. They might take longer to respond, or they may communicate in ways that feel unfamiliar. That doesn't mean they're being difficult. It just means they're coming from a different perspective and a different lens. The more we can slow down and try to see from their perspective, the better opportunity we can get at connecting across cultures. So basically, listen more, judge less, and stay curious. That's, I think, how I feel to build trust and actually learn more from each other.
Yes, totally. And final question is there anything else you'd like to share about your culture, communication, experiences, or the importance of intercultural understanding?
Definitely. I think the coolest things about being Filipino American and Mexican American, especially in the Bay Area, is that I grew up seeing how powerful culture connection can be. In my day-to-day life, I'm constantly shifting between cultures, speaking differently when I'm with my family, with my buddies from high school, talking with professors. And honestly, it's not being fake, it's just adapting to the environment that I'm in at the moment. I feel like it's a skill. And a lot of us who come from multicultural backgrounds end up where it's almost natural for us to be able to go back and forth. I think intercultural understanding is incredibly important, especially for our generation, because we're living in a time where the world is more connected than ever, but also more divided in some ways. If we don't take the time to understand each other, we're just adding to that division. However, if we do try to build bridges, I think the culture differences actually become a better connector for all of us to be able to understand each other. Just like learning how to say someone's name correctly, or respecting how they show emotion, or asking what holiday they happen to be celebrating. Those things add up and indicates that you actually care about the person and getting to know them and their culture better. From my experience, I've seen how much deeper relationships go when people take time to learn about different cultures. When a friend asks about Filipino food or comes to me with a fiesta, it shows effort, and effort builds trust. To me, intercultural understanding isn't just something nice to have, it's essential. It helps us connect, collaborate, and ultimately grow. And it just makes life more interesting. We all bring something different to the table, and I think if we're open to that, then we all can win.
Awesome. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for coming today, and I really appreciate it. And this is the end of my interview.